She sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. Isn't that what our souls truly want? Isn't that what our souls truly need, is to just be with him, to hear his words, to know his truth, to be transformed by him? Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm gonna guess that the Bible story we're covering in today's video is one that you've probably heard before, and I'm also gonna guess that I'm not gonna say anything in today's video that you haven't heard before. But there's a really simple principle illustrated in the Bible story we're gonna unpack today that I honestly just really needed to be reminded of, and so maybe you do too. I want you to hear the words of Jesus that he is speaking in this Bible story. He's speaking them to you and he's speaking them to me. Before we get into it, if you haven't already, please be sure to hit the subscribe button. I make Christian faith and lifestyle content and I would love to have you here. And then give this video a thumbs up if you find it helpful or encouraging. The passage we're going to be looking at today is found in Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. Grab a Bible, read along with me, and I'm also going to have the text up on the screen. Here's what it says. Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village. And a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. But she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken from her." So you've likely heard this story before. Again, we've got two sisters, one who is running around doing all these things for God, and the other who is simply being with God. And Jesus says to the sister who has chosen to simply be with him that she has chosen the right thing. And I feel like I've heard this story a ton growing up in a Christian home and going to a Christian church. And I feel like I've always heard it with a twinge of guilt because I am Martha. I am an achiever. I am a getter, things doneer, a to-do list maker, and I am much better at doing than simply being. And so I feel like I've always heard this story just thinking, man, that is so me and that's just my bent, and I'm somebody who likes to do. But it wasn't until reading this passage this most recent time that I noticed specifically what is called out here, and it is the word distracted. In verse 40, it says, "But Martha was distracted with much serving." So the problem wasn't that Martha was serving or working or doing. It wasn't that she was serving in and of itself. The problem is that she was distracted with much serving. The reality is that we are called to serve. We are called to be hospitable. The very last parable that was just talked about before we get into this story, also in Luke 10, is the parable of the Good Samaritan, which talks a lot about loving the person who is your enemy and showing hospitality to them. So we are called to serve. We're called to be hospitable. We're called to work. And these are all the things that Martha was doing. But the point here is that all of those things are meaningless if they don't first find their foundation on simply being with Jesus. If we look at the definition of the word distracted in the dictionary, it says unable to concentrate because one's mind is preoccupied. If we look at the Greek word that we get our word distracted from here, it gives the idea of being pulled in a bunch of different directions. And I don't know about you, but this is something I feel constantly. I feel like sometimes even in all of my doing, it's hard for me to focus on the thing that I am doing because my mind is just constantly on a million different things. And distraction, it has an effect on us. And so I want to look at a couple different ways that we see from this passage how distraction affects us. The first thing is that it can make us feel like Jesus doesn't care. In verse 40, Martha says, "Lord, do you not care?" I feel like sometimes when we feel overwhelmed by our to-do list, by the things that we're doing, by just the busyness of life, we feel like we're falling behind. We feel like we're still not making it happen or seeing results from all of our striving or our hustling. And we just feel burnt out and spent and like we're still not hitting the mark. And we feel like, God, do you even care? And that's what we see here from Martha. She is just so busied with getting everything ready for Jesus being there, and she sees Mary not helping her, and she's like, Lord, do you care? The next thing we see about distraction is that it can make us resentful of other people, which is that exact point I was leading into. Also in verse 40, she says, my sister has left me to serve alone. I think that sometimes when we feel overwhelmed just with our lives, with our busyness, and we're distracted by all the unimportant things that are keeping us from the Lord, we can look at somebody who has a thriving relationship with the Lord, who spends hours in prayer, who spends just this time with him, reading his word and sitting at his feet and listening to him, and think, that must be nice. Like, I wish I had the time to just be with God, but I don't have time for that in my life. But the reality is it was a choice that was made. Martha chose to be preparing and doing all of these things, and Mary chose to sit at the feet of the Lord. And it is the same thing in our lives. Even when we feel like there's not time, or it feels like we're too busy, in reality, a lot of the times, at least I know for me, it's because I'm prioritizing something over spending time with God. I talked about this in my video where God kind of gave me a heart check because I realized I was doing exactly this. But this is an effect of distraction, is it can cause us to be resentful at other people who seem to have the peace or the ability to just be and be in the presence of the Lord that we long for. The third thing that distraction can do is it makes us miss the most important thing. Also in verse 40, she says, tell her then to help me. She's talking to Jesus saying, do you not care, Lord? Don't you see Mary over there sitting there doing nothing? Tell her to get up and help me. And we see here that Martha is just so fixated on everything that needs to be done that she's literally missing the point of it all. All of her work, all of her efforts, all of it was aimed at creating this environment where they could host their special guest, which was Jesus. And in all of her doing and preparing and getting things set up, she misses that he is right there in front of her, and that Mary is the one who has chosen to sit at his feet. Martha is missing it, and Jesus' response gently directs her toward this reality. Here's how he responds in verse 41. He says, but the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. I think it's important to recognize here that Jesus is not condemning Martha, but rather he is helping her to see that Mary has chosen the option that brings life, and he is beckoning with Martha to choose the same. The Enduring Word commentary talking about this verse says, we can almost sense the love in Jesus's voice as he says this. Martha did good. She wanted to serve Jesus, but she had not added the one thing that is needed. The Bible speaks elsewhere of this one thing in Psalm 27:4, which says, one thing I have desired of the Lord that I will seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. It's this idea of dwelling in God's house, of being with him, of abiding in him, to behold his beauty, to look at who he is as he's revealed himself to us on the pages of Scripture, to adore him, to know him, to be with him. So what is the one good thing? It is being with Jesus. It is loving him by listening to his word. This is exactly how the text describes what Mary is doing. Again, a reminder at the very beginning. It says that Martha had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. Doesn't your heart just like breathe a sigh of relief in listening to that line? She sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. Isn't that what our souls truly want? Isn't that what our souls truly need, is to just be with him, to hear his words, to know his truth, to be transformed by him? And yet we're missing it. We're getting caught up in all the doing and the striving, even doing for him, even serving him, even doing maybe ministry related things or things that we think are going to please him, and when in reality he simply wants us to be with him. As it says that Mary sat at the Lord's feet, a little bit of Jewish context here. This is the posture that a student would take as he was listening to a rabbi or learning from a rabbi. It would be a posture of sitting at that rabbi's feet and listening. According to the Enduring Word commentary, contextually, there's a couple things that sitting at the feet of Jesus would imply. It implies a readiness to accept and obey what he teaches. It implies a submission to him. It implies faith in who he is, and it implies discipleship. What it's getting at here is this: service for God should never take precedence over time with God. And if we're not spending time with God, then anything we're doing for God is going to feel empty. It's going to feel empty, and it's also going to be ineffective. Here's a quote by Charles Spurgeon. I love talking about this passage. It says, "The way to get the revival is to begin at the Master's feet. You must go there with Mary, and afterwards you may work with Martha." Here it's getting at the idea that anything meaningful in our lives, anything we will do, any great work of God, anything meaningful is going to first come from time spent with God. Any work that we do for God should flow from our time spent with him. And Jesus says this same thing in John chapter 15. I have a whole Bible study on it that I'll link above if you want to check it out. But he says that apart from me, you can do nothing. But if you abide in me, then you will bear much fruit. I think that sometimes we go spinning our wheels trying to do all of this stuff for Jesus, but it's disconnected from the true power source, which is connection with Jesus, abiding in Jesus, listening to Jesus, spending time with him, and listening to his words. And it can be so easy to neglect that in pursuit of all these things that we have to do. But what it is we're truly seeking for can only be found in his presence. I needed to be reminded of this because all too often I'm Martha. I choose doing for God over simply being with God, and then I feel the effects of it. I long for that time to just sit at his feet and listen, and he invites us to that. We don't have to earn that. We don't have to hit some certain goal before we can do that. He invites us into that every single day, and we're going to feel empty. We're going to feel dry. We're going to feel just all the lack of the fruit of the Spirit in our lives when we are not connected to our source. And so I encourage you today with this reminder that I need to choose the one good thing. Prioritize the one good thing, because like Jesus says here, it is the one thing that cannot be taken from you. Nobody can take from you the ability to sit at the Lord's feet and listen to his words. I would love to hear from you down in the comments. What is something you've been allowing to distract you from the one good thing, and what can you do to combat that? I'm going to be sharing what that is for me and what I've been doing to actively combat that distraction down in a pinned comment below, and I look forward to reading through your testimonies as well. As we go about this next week, let us remember to seek the one good thing, because everything else is secondary to that. I hope that you found this video helpful or encouraging. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.